Here we are. So this would be the mound under which lays Liu Xie, the last emperor of the Han Dynasty, and the most tragic figure, because from his childhood he was basically a puppet emperor. First, he was born the second son of the former emperor, the then still emperor. His elder brother was supposed to become the next emperor. But what happened is that when they were kids, still very young, under 10 or near 10, I believe, their father died, and the big brother became the next emperor for some time. Then the government basically fell under control of the tyrant Dongzhuo, who had the emperor deposed, then killed, to replace with the younger brother. There are two reasons for that. The official reason is because the second brother was supposedly more deserving. He was brighter, more courageous than his big brother, but really it's probably just because he was younger and then could have been controlled for much longer than his big brother. Now, so Liu Xie became the emperor from a very young age. I believe he was not far from 10, and he became the puppet emperor of Dongzhuo. Then when Dongzhuo was slain, he became the puppet emperor of two subordinates of Dongzhuo named Li Jue and Guo Se. Then he managed to escape the capital of Chang'an, where he was being held. Then after several months of trying to find his way back to his capital, he was rescued by Cao Cao, or he was welcomed by Cao Cao, who invited him to the new capital of Xuchang. And this is where he remained for the next 25 years or so, again as a puppet emperor. And at first it seemed like Cao Cao was behaving with a lot of respect and honor for the emperor, but then that went south very fast. This respect eroded to the point that Cao Cao had the empress consort killed because she was the daughter of someone who was going to betray him. Then same with the empress. The empress died later on, and Cao Cao replaced her with his own daughter. So the last empress of the Han Dynasty was the daughter of Cao Cao. I believe her name was Cao Jie. But she seemed to have been truly attached to her husband, more so than her clan, in a way. And this remained the situation until the death of Cao Cao. Cao Cao didn't need to prove his power, so he kept supporting officially the emperor. But very soon after his death, his son, Cao Pi, who had to prove himself if he wanted to keep power, deposed the emperor, Liu Xie, and started the Cao Dynasty. Cao Wei Dynasty. The Emperor Liu Xie remained alive for some time, by the way. He wasn't, as you can see in some versions of the story, he wasn't killed. He didn't die right away. He became the king of this. I don't know exactly the limits of his power, but he was in charge of a place called Xianyang, which is exactly where we are now. And from all the stories we have, he ruled over this place with a lot of benevolence. He was a great man, which makes his end even more tragic, because he was probably one of the very few Han emperor, at least in the second half of the Han Dynasty, the Eastern Han Dynasty, that was truly deserving of being an emperor based on his character alone. Maybe he was such a good man because of the hardship he suffered all his life, but nevertheless, it seems like when he became king and no longer emperor, he ruled his land with a lot of humility and very generously. That is how he's being remembered. So when he died, he was buried with the respect due to an emperor, but he wasn't buried in Luoyang, where all the past emperors of the Eastern Han Dynasty were buried. Of course, he was the only one of them that didn't live in Luoyang before. So nevertheless, he was buried where he ruled at the end of his life. And when his wife, so the daughter of Cao Cao, died some 30-something years later, she too was buried here. So we are not just in the presence of Liu Xie here, but also of Cao Cao's daughter, and the last empress of the Han Dynasty. This is a really tragic story that I hope, at least as far as Liu Xie is concerned, I am portraying respectfully and convincingly enough. Because I do believe he was probably one of the biggest victims of his time. Not just, of course, we can think about his time under Dongzhuo, that would have been awful. Then when he was on the road for so long, it seemed to have been a miserable time. But he managed to survive, to retain a sense of power, even though there was maybe a bit of a shadow power. He kept performing the rites. He showed an example that most of his predecessors didn't show. Like, if you read the accounts of his predecessors, they didn't seem to have really shine. Now, this mausoleum is truly beautiful. Like, I wonder what is best, if it is to rest in such a place or among many imperial tombs. I don't assume many people come visit, but it is nevertheless a really cute garden around the monticule. So I think the Chinese people is doing well by Liu Xie. That's it for me today. I am still trying to prepare tomorrow's journey to Hulao Gate, or at least Hulao, because there is no longer any gate. It seems to be a bit of a tricky journey, so I'm not sure if I'll manage, but please follow along to see what's left of Hulao and Sishui, the place of one of the most famous battles of the Three Kingdoms era. I forgot to mention something really important about Cao Jie, so Cao Cao's daughter. Okay, that's going to be a personal observation, but in the Three Kingdoms, in the romance of the Three Kingdoms especially, but also very often in Chinese history, women have two roles. They can either be victim or they can be manipulators. Cao Jie is one of the few exceptions I can think of, because she was no victim. Like, when her brother became emperor and tried to take away her imperial whatever it was, she outright refused him, and she kept fighting for her husband to retain some honors. And she was no conspirator either. She actually smoothed the angles, you would say, between the emperor and the Cao clan, and kept doing so for many years after that. From what little I know of her, she seemed to have been a remarkable character, a very strong woman, the likes of which, well, she was without a doubt truly Cao Cao's daughter. And even though she became an empress in a really odd way, it seems like she actually did all right by the emperor. So anyway, I think she deserves to be more known than she is.